The dust had turned her blue dress gray by the time she realized no one was coming for her at all. Winifred Turner sat on her worn leather trunk outside the Telluride depot, watching the sun dip behind the San Juan Mountains for the third consecutive evening. The September air in 1882 carried a crispness that promised an early winter, and she pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. 3 days she had waited. 3 days of watching every rider approach with hope blooming in her chest, only to wither when they passed by without a glance. The station master had stopped asking if she needed help after the first day. His pity filled looks more unbearable than the hunger gnawing at her stomach. She had traveled all the way from Philadelphia with nothing but a single trunk and a letter from Samuel Garrett promising marriage, a home, and a fresh start in Colorado territory. The letter had been eloquent and kind, describing his ranch and his desire for a good woman to share his life. Winifred had responded honestly, including a photograph and her own hopes for a peaceful life far from the crowded streets where she had worked as a seamstress in her aunt's shop. After her aunt's death 6 months prior, there had been nothing left for her in Philadelphia but debts and unwanted advances from the landlord's son. Samuel's proposal had seemed like Providence itself. Now she wondered if Providence had a cruel sense of humor. The depot was emptying as the last few travelers collected their belongings and departed into the bustling mining town. Telluride sprawled before her, a collection of wooden buildings pressed between towering mountain peaks, alive with the sounds of piano music, shouting miners, and the occasional gunshot. She had no money left for lodging, having spent her last coins on bread and water that morning. The station master was locking up, casting one final sympathetic look in her direction before heading home to whatever warm meal awaited him. Winifred refused to cry. She had shed enough tears in her 22 years to know they solved nothing. Instead, she opened her trunk and pulled out an extra petticoat, draping it over her shoulders for warmth. If she had to sleep on this bench again, she would at least be prepared. Tomorrow she would have to make a decision. Perhaps she could find work in town, though the thought of approaching the saloons made her stomach turn. She was respectable, or at least she had been back in Philadelphia. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, though she had trained herself not to hope anymore. A lone rider approached on a bay horse, sitting tall in the saddle despite the obvious weariness in his posture. He wore a dark hat pulled low, leather chaps over worn denim, and a dusty brown coat that had seen better days. As he drew closer, she could make out a strong jaw, shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that swept the empty depot with practiced wariness. Those eyes landed on her and stayed. The cowboy brought his horse to a stop directly in front of the platform, studying her with an intensity that made her sit straighter. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with features that would have been handsome if not for the exhaustion etched into every line. There was something both rough and gentle in his expression, like a man who had seen hard times but refused to let them harden his heart completely. "Miss Turner?" His voice was deep and slightly hoarse, as though he had not spoken in days. Winifred's heart stuttered. "Yes, I am Winifred Turner." He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair badly in need of a trim. "Name is Barrett Langley. I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here, up in the valley. I believe you were expecting to meet Samuel Garrett." The way he said it with such careful neutrality told her everything she needed to know before he spoke another word. She stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting for so long. "We're expecting." Past tense. Barrett Langley looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. "Samuel was my neighbor. Good man, one of the best I have known. He talked about you constantly these past 2 months, showed everyone in the valley your photograph. He was building an addition to his house, fixing it up real nice." He paused, his jaw working as though the words were difficult to form. 3 weeks ago, he was helping me move cattle down from the high country. His horse stepped in a gopher hole, went down hard. Samuel hit his head on a rock. He never woke up. The mountain air seemed too thin suddenly, and Winifred sank back onto the bench. She had never met Samuel Garrett, had only his letters and the dream of what could be, yet the loss felt tangible. More than that, it meant her last hope had crumbled into dust, like everything else in her life. "I am sorry for your loss," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "He sounded like a good man in his letters." "He was." Barrett sat down on the bench beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I have been up in the high country for the past 3 weeks. Did not get word about your arrival until I came down yesterday. Old Pete at the Mercantile mentioned seeing a woman waiting at the depot for days. I came as soon as I realized who you must be." 3 days, Winifred said softly, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "I suppose I should have inquired in town, but I kept thinking surely someone would come. Surely there was just a delay." "You have been here 3 whole days?" Barrett's voice carried a note of something that might have been anger, though not directed at her. "Where have you been sleeping?" "Here." "Here? On this bench? In the cold?" Now the anger was unmistakable, though she still sensed it was not meant for her. "Did no one offer you help? The church? The hotel?" "I have no money for a hotel, and I was not certain how to find the church. I am not from here, Mr. Langley. I am from Philadelphia, and I find myself in a rather impossible situation." She turned to look at him directly, meeting his dark eyes without flinching. "I will not pretend otherwise. I have no funds for passage home, no home to return to even if I did, and no prospects for employment suitable for a woman alone. I am not asking for your charity, but I would appreciate honesty. Is there any work in Telluride that would allow me to maintain my respectability?" Barrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. She had the sensation of being truly seen, not just looked at but understood in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly reassuring. Finally, he spoke. "Telluride is a mining town, Miss Turner. The work available for women is limited, and most of it is in the saloons. There are a few shops, a laundry, but jobs are scarce and the competition is fierce. You would be sleeping in a shack with 10 other women if you were lucky enough to find work at all." He placed his hat back on his head, then stood and offered her his hand. "I have a proposal for you, and I want you to hear me out before you answer." Winifred took his hand and rose, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the strength that was carefully controlled to avoid hurting her. "I am listening." "My ranch is not fancy, but it is solid. I have a 2-room cabin, a barn, good grazing land, and about 100 head of cattle. I work the land alone right now, though I hire help during roundup. What I do not have is a wife, and at 28 years old, I am starting to feel the lack." He spoke matter-of-factly, as though discussing the weather rather than proposing a life-changing arrangement. "You came here to marry and build a life. The man you were supposed to marry is gone, but the need that brought you here has not changed. I am offering you the same things Samuel would have offered: marriage, a home, and a chance to build something real." "You do not know me," Winifred said carefully. "I could be anyone. I could be a terrible cook, a shrew, or worse. Samuel knew you through letters, and he was a fine judge of character. If he thought well enough of you to propose marriage, that is good enough for me. As for cooking, I have been feeding myself for 10 years and have not died yet, so the bar is fairly low." A hint of humor touched his eyes. "And I have worked with enough horses and cattle to handle a shrew if it comes to that." Despite everything, Winifred felt a smile tug at her lips. "You are serious. Dead serious. I need a wife. You need a husband and a home. We can stand here and pretend that romance is the only reason people marry, or we can be honest and admit that most marriages are based on practical needs and hope that affection follows. Samuel believed you were the kind of woman worth building a life with. I am willing to trust his judgment and give this a fair chance if you are." It was insane. She had known this man for all of 10 minutes, and he was proposing marriage as casually as he might propose a business arrangement. And yet, was it really any different from what she had agreed to with Samuel? She had been willing to marry a stranger based on letters and hope. At least Barrett Langley had the honesty to call it what it was. What would you expect from me? She needed to know the terms, needed to understand what she would be agreeing to. Same thing any husband expects, I suppose. Help running the household, cooking when you're able, maybe tending a garden come spring. I work the ranch from dawn to dusk most days, and I expect I will be tired and poor company much of the time. But I would treat you with respect, provide for you to the best of my ability, and never raise a hand to you in anger. I am not much for talking, but I am not cruel either. And the other expectations? Winifred forced herself to ask, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Of a wife in the marriage bed? Barrett looked away, a flush of color appearing above his collar. That would be between us to work out. I am not an animal, Miss Turner. I would not force myself on an unwilling woman. If affection grows between us, then we will cross that bridge when we come to it. If it does not, well, we will figure something out. Right now, I am offering you safety and a home. The rest can wait. It was the most honest proposal she could have imagined, and perhaps that was what decided her. No false promises of love, no poetic declarations, just a straightforward offer from a man who seemed to understand that life was more about survival than romance. She could accept that. She could work with honest need and mutual respect. I accept your proposal, Mr. Langley. He looked back at her, surprise flickering across his face, as though he had not quite expected her to agree. Just like that? Just like that. I came here to marry a stranger and build a new life. You may not be the stranger I expected, but the goal remains the same. If you are willing to take a chance on me based on Samuel's judgment, then I am willing to take a chance on you based on the fact that you rode out here to help me when you had no obligation to do so. That speaks to character, I think. A slow smile spread across Barrett's face, transforming his tired features into something approaching handsome. Well then, Miss Turner, I suppose we should make this official before you come to your senses. There is a preacher in town, lives above the general store. If he is still awake, we can be married within the hour. If you would prefer to wait, I can arrange for you to stay at the boarding house tonight. I have been waiting for 3 days, Mr. Langley. I see no reason to wait any longer. Winifred felt a strange calm settle over her. This was happening. She was actually going to marry this dusty cowboy and ride off into the mountains to a life she could not quite imagine. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt only relief. At least the waiting was over. At least now she had a direction, a purpose, a plan. Barrett picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing, slinging it onto his horse's back and securing it with practiced efficiency. Then he turned back to her and offered his arm. Shall we then, Miss Turner? She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the worn fabric of his coat. We shall, Mr. Langley. They walked through the darkening streets of Telluride side by side, an unlikely pair bound by circumstance and necessity. The town was alive with evening activity, miners streaming from the slopes toward the saloons, women calling to each other from doorways, the sound of a fiddle drifting through the air. No one paid them much attention, just another cowboy and another woman in a town that saw dozens of each every day. The general store was closed, but a light burned in the window above. Barrett knocked firmly on the door until a balding man in suspenders poked his head out of the upstairs window. We are closed, he called down irritably. I need to speak to Preacher Walsh, Barrett called back. It is important. Preacher is eating his supper. Come back tomorrow. It cannot wait. I have a woman here who needs to be married tonight. The man's eyebrows rose, and he studied Winifred with undisguised curiosity. That the mail-order bride been sitting at the depot? Yes, and she is about to be my wife if your preacher can spare 10 minutes from his supper. There was a long pause, then the sound of voices conferring inside. Finally, the door opened to reveal a thin man with kind eyes and gravy stains on his shirt. Preacher Walsh looked between Barrett and Winifred, taking in her dusty dress and exhausted face, his expression softening. Come in, he said, ushering them inside the store. Barrett Langley, I have known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, and I have never known you to act impulsively. You certain about this? More certain than I have been about anything in a long while, preacher. And you, miss? The preacher turned to Winifred. You sure you want to marry this dusty cowpoke? He spends more time with cattle than people, and his conversation is not exactly what you would call stimulating. Winifred looked at Barrett, who stood quietly accepting the preacher's ribbing with good-natured patience. There was something solid about him, something steady and true. She had trusted the words of a man she had never met. Surely she could trust the actions of a man who had sought her out to help when he had no reason to be on basic human decency. I am sure, preacher, or at least as sure as anyone can be about such things. Preacher Walsh nodded slowly. All right, then. Let me get my book. Mrs. Walsh, come down here and be a witness. Within minutes, Winifred found herself standing in a general store that smelled of coffee and leather, her hand clasped in Barrett's calloused palm, speaking vows that would bind her life to his. The ceremony was brief and pragmatic, no flowers or music, just simple words spoken in the presence of God and two witnesses. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Barrett leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. Thank you, he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. You are welcome, she whispered back, not entirely sure what they were thanking each other for, but feeling it was the right response nonetheless. They signed the marriage certificate, Barrett's signature bold and surprisingly elegant, Winifred's hand shaking only slightly as she wrote her new name for the first time. Winifred Langley. It looked strange on the paper, unfamiliar, yet somehow right. Barrett paid the preacher, refusing to let Winifred see how much, then led her back outside, where his horse waited patiently. The evening had deepened into full night, stars beginning to emerge in the vast Colorado sky. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and Winifred shivered despite her shawl and extra petticoat. It is 15 miles to the ranch, Barrett said, untying his horse. Normally I would ride, but we can take it slow with both of us up. Are you comfortable riding? I have ridden before, though not recently. He nodded and swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down for her. Winifred placed her foot on his boot and allowed him to pull her up behind him. It was awkward at first, her skirts tangling, her body unsure where to hold on. Barrett solved the problem by reaching back and pulling her arms around his waist. Hold on tight, he said. The trail can be rough in places. Winifred wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of his body through his coat. It was strange to be this close to a man, to feel the rhythm of his breathing and the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Barrett clicked his tongue, and the horse began to walk, carrying them away from Telluride and into the dark mountains beyond. The trail climbed steadily, winding through pine forests and across open meadows where the starlight seemed bright enough to read by. Barrett rode in silence, his body relaxed despite the long day, occasionally pointing out landmarks she could barely see in the darkness. A creek that provided water year-round. A stand of aspens that turned gold as coins in the fall. The ridge that marked the boundary of his property. Almost there, he said after what felt like hours but was probably less than one. Just over this next rise. The cabin appeared suddenly, a dark shape against the darker forest, with a barn nearby and a corral just visible in the starlight. It was small but well built, smoke rising from the chimney suggesting a fire had been banked before he left. Barrett brought the horse to a stop in front of the porch and dismounted, then reached up to help Winifred down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, stiff from the cold and the ride, but his hands steadied her until she found her balance. Wait here, he said, then disappeared inside. A moment later, lamplight bloomed in the windows, warm and welcoming. He returned and picked up her trunk, gesturing for her to follow him inside. The cabin was simple but clean, one large room serving as both kitchen and living area, with a fireplace taking up most of one wall. A table and two chairs sat near the kitchen area. A faded rug covered part of the wooden floor, and shelves lined the walls holding supplies and a few books. A door stood open on the far wall, revealing what must be the bedroom. Barrett set her trunk down near the door and moved to the fireplace, stirring the banked coals back to life and adding fresh wood. The flames caught quickly, sending warm light dancing across the rough-hewn walls. "It is not much," he said, not looking at her. "I know it is not what you expected, not what Samuel would have given you. His place was bigger, nicer, but it is warm and dry and the roof does not leak." "It is perfect," Winifred said, and was surprised to find she meant it. After 3 days on a depot bench, this small cabin felt like a palace. "Truly, Mr. Langley, it is more than I had any right to hope for a few hours ago." He turned to look at her then, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "You can call me Barrett. I think we are past formalities now." "Barrett," she tested the name on her tongue. "And you should call me Winifred. Or Winnie, if you prefer. My aunt used to call me Winnie." "Winnie," he repeated softly. "I like that. It suits you better than Winifred. Less formal." An awkward silence fell between them, the reality of their situation suddenly very present. They were married, legally bound, alone in a cabin miles from anyone else. Winifred felt her heart begin to race, not quite fear, but not quite calm either. Barrett seemed to sense her discomfort. "You must be hungry. I have stew left from this morning, and I can make coffee. It is not fancy, but it will fill your belly." "That sounds wonderful. Can I help?" "You can sit. You have been through enough today." He moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out pots and dishes with the efficiency of someone long accustomed to caring for himself. "Tomorrow I will show you where everything is, and you can take over the kitchen if you want. Tonight you are a guest." Winifred sat at the table watching him work. He moved with purpose, no wasted motion, heating the stew and brewing coffee over the fire. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and worn but capable, the hands of a man who built and fixed and worked with them daily. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to her, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "Thank you." She sipped the coffee, finding it strong and hot and exactly what she needed. The warmth spread through her chest, thawing parts of her that had been cold for days. Barrett served the stew in wooden bowls, then sat across from her at the table. It was strange, this domestic scene, sharing a meal with a man she had married mere hours ago. The stew was surprisingly good, thick with meat and vegetables, and seasoned well. They ate in comfortable silence, too hungry and tired for conversation. When the meal was finished, Barrett cleared the dishes and heated water for washing. He moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency, banking the fire for the night, checking the door was latched, performing what were clearly nightly rituals. Winifred watched, trying to memorize the routines she would be expected to know. "The bedroom is through there," Barrett said finally, gesturing to the open door. "I put fresh linens on the bed this morning before I left for town. There is a wash basin and pitcher, towels in the chest at the foot of the bed." "Where will you sleep?" He looked surprised by the question. "In the bedroom. It is the only bed." Winifred's heart began to race again. "Oh, of course." Barrett crossed the room to stand in front of her, his expression serious. "Winnie, look at me." She lifted her eyes to his, finding them kind despite the roughness of his features. "I meant what I said earlier. I am not going to force anything on you. We will share the bed because it is the only one and because it is too cold for either of us to sleep out here without proper blankets. But that is all. You have my word as a gentleman, such as I am." "You are a gentleman," Winifred said softly. "More than many who claim the title back in Philadelphia." Something flickered in his eyes. Gratitude, perhaps? Or relief? Come on, then. You must be exhausted. The bedroom was small, dominated by a large bed covered in quilts. A dresser stood against one wall, a washstand against another, and a single window looked out into the darkness. Barrett lit a candle on the dresser, then turned his back to give her privacy. I will step outside for a few minutes, let you change and settle in. Just call when you are ready. He left, closing the door behind him, and Winifred sagged with relief. She opened her trunk and pulled out her nightgown, a simple white cotton affair that was warm, if not pretty. Her hands shook as she undressed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. She had been waiting hopelessly at a depot this morning, and now she was married to a stranger, preparing to share his bed, her entire life irrevocably changed. She washed quickly with the cold water in the basin, then pulled on her nightgown and braided her hair. The bed looked impossibly inviting, and she climbed under the quilts, positioning herself as far to one side as possible. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind raced with thoughts and fears and questions about what would come next. "Winnie!" Barrett's voice called from outside. "Can I come in?" "Yes." He entered quietly, moving to the washstand to clean up. Winifred closed her eyes, giving him the same privacy he had afforded her, though she could hear the sounds of him washing and changing clothes. The bed dipped when he climbed in, and she felt the warmth of his body, even though he kept to his side, a careful distance between them. "Good night, Winnie," he said softly, blowing out the candle. "Good night, Barrett." Darkness enveloped the room, broken only by the faint glow of starlight through the window. Winifred lay rigid, acutely aware of every sound, every movement from the man beside her. She listened to his breathing gradually slow and deepen, marveling that he could fall asleep so easily when her own mind refused to quiet. But the bed was soft, the quilts warm, and her body was desperately tired. Slowly she felt herself relaxing, the tension draining from her muscles. Her last conscious thought was that she was safe, truly safe for the first time in months. Then sleep claimed her, deep and dreamless and restorative. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the other room. Sunlight streamed through the window, bright and warm, telling her it was well past dawn. Winifred sat up, momentarily disoriented, before the memories of the previous day came flooding back. She was married. She was in Colorado. She was in Barrett Langley's cabin, and he was apparently already up and working. She dressed quickly in a simple calico dress, one of her sturdier pieces suitable for housework, and braided her hair into a practical plait. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Barrett at the stove, cooking what smelled like bacon. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "I was starting to think you might sleep until noon." "Which you deserve, so no judgment. What time is it?" "About 9. I have already fed the stock and brought in water from the creek. Figured I would let you sleep after the few days you have had." Winifred moved to stand beside him at the stove, noting the efficient way he managed the cooking. "You should have woken me. I can do this." "I know you can, but there is no rush. We have all the time in the world to settle into a routine." He plated the bacon and eggs, then gestured to the table. "Sit. Eat. Then I will show you around the place and you can tell me if there is anything you need." They ate breakfast together, the morning light making everything seem less strange than it had the night before. Barrett told her about the ranch, the work that needed doing before winter set in, his plans for expanding the herd come spring. Winifred listened, asking questions when appropriate, trying to understand this new world she had entered. After breakfast, Barrett took her on a tour of the property. The ranch was beautiful in the morning light, the cabin nestled in a valley with towering peaks rising on all sides. A clear creek ran nearby, providing fresh water year-round. The barn was well maintained, housing 2 horses and space for hay storage. The corral held a dozen cattle, hardy-looking beasts with thick coats already growing in for winter. "The main herd is in the high pasture," Barrett explained, leaning on the corral fence. I will bring them down before the first heavy snow. For now, they are better off up there where the grass is still good." "How do you manage all this alone?" Winifred asked, genuinely curious. "Carefully," he grinned at her, "and with long hours. I hire help during roundup and branding, and my neighbor to the south helps sometimes in exchange for me helping him. But mostly, it is just me and the work. That is part of why I agreed with Samuel that bringing a wife out was a good idea. It gets lonely up here, and there is only so much a man can do alone." They walked back to the cabin, Barrett pointing out where he wanted to put in a larger garden come spring, where the best fishing spots were on the creek, where to watch for bears in the early morning. Winifred absorbed it all, feeling overwhelmed but also strangely excited. This was so different from Philadelphia, from the cramped apartment and the endless rows of identical buildings. Here there was space and sky and a kind of wild beauty that took her breath away. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Barrett rose before dawn to tend the animals and work the ranch, while Winifred took over the household tasks. She cooked and cleaned, learning to manage the wood stove and make bread in the high altitude. Barrett was patient with her mistakes, never criticizing when she burned the biscuits or oversalted the stew. He taught her how to churn butter, how to preserve vegetables for winter, how to read the sky for coming weather. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Barrett mending tack or carving, while Winifred sewed or read from one of the few books on the shelves. They talked more as the days passed, hesitant at first, but gradually more comfortable. She learned he had come west at 18 after his parents died of fever, had worked as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy this land. He learned she had been raised by her aunt after her own parents died in a factory fire, had learned sewing and keeping house, but had always dreamed of something beyond the city's grimy streets. They were two orphans who had found each other by chance, building something new from the wreckage of their pasts. One evening, about 3 weeks after their marriage, Winifred was washing dishes when she felt Barrett's presence behind her. He had been quiet all day, thoughtful in a way that was unusual even for him. "Winnie, can we talk?" She dried her hands and turned to face him, her heart suddenly pounding. His expression was serious but not unkind. "Of course." He gestured to the table, and they sat across from each other in their usual spots. Barrett turned his coffee cup in his hands, not looking at her. "I want to thank you," he said finally, "for giving this a chance, for working so hard, for making this place feel like a home instead of just a cabin I sleep in. These past weeks have been good, better than I expected." "For me as well," Winifred said honestly. "I know this was not the marriage either of us planned, but I am grateful for it nonetheless. That is what I want to talk about." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "This marriage, I mean. We have been dancing around the elephant in the room, being polite and careful, and that is fine. But I need to know where we stand, what you want this to be. Are we partners in a business arrangement, or are we working towards something more?" Winifred's breath caught. She had been wondering the same thing but had been too afraid to ask. "What do you want it to be?" "I want a real marriage, Winnie. Not just a practical arrangement. I want someone to share my life with, not just my cabin, but only if that is what you want too. I will not pressure you, will not force anything, but I need to know if there is a chance you might come to care for me as more than just a provider." She studied him in the firelight, this man who had saved her from despair and asked for so little in return. Over the past weeks, she had come to appreciate his quiet strength, his dry humor, his unfailing kindness. He was handsome in a rugged way, though she suspected he had no idea. More than that, he was good, genuinely good in a way that was rare in her experience. "I think I am already starting to care for you," she admitted softly. "I did not expect to, but there it is. You have been nothing but kind to me, Barrett. You gave me safety when I had none, a home when I was lost, respect when I had no right to expect it. How could I not care for you?" Something in his expression shifted, hope blooming where there had been uncertainty. "You mean that?" "I do. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I feel as though I can trust you in a way I have never trusted anyone. That has to count for something." Barrett reached across the table, his hand palm up in invitation. Winifred placed her hand in his, feeling the familiar calluses and the warmth of his skin. His fingers closed around hers gently. "I care for you too," he said. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. When I look at you, I do not see a stranger or a convenience. I see a woman with courage and grace, someone who took a terrible situation and made the best of it. I see someone I want to build a life with if you will have me." "I will have you, Barrett Langley. I already did, in fact, though it bears repeating." He stood and moved around the table, drawing her to her feet. For a long moment they simply stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other in the flickering firelight. Then Barrett lifted his free hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "May I kiss you? A real kiss, not the one at our wedding." "Yes." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But Winifred did not want to change her mind. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. She felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a feeling she had thought lost to her forever. Hope, affection, the beginning of something that might one day be love. When they parted, Barrett rested his forehead against hers. "I will do everything in my power to make you happy, Winnie. That is a promise." "I believe you," she whispered. "And I will do the same for you." That night, when they lay in bed, there was no careful distance between them. Winifred curled against Barrett's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arm wrapped around her, holding her close, and she felt safe in a way that went beyond physical protection. This was emotional safety, the security of knowing she was wanted and valued and cared for. "Good night, Winnie," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Good night, Barrett." The days grew shorter as autumn deepened into early winter. Barrett worked long hours bringing the cattle down from the high country, and Winifred worked alongside him when she could, learning to ride properly and help move the stubborn beasts. She discovered a strength in herself she had not known existed, a resilience forged from necessity, but tempered with growing confidence. Their evenings together became the highlight of her day. They would sit close by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Barrett would read to her from the newspaper when he went to town for supplies, and she would tell him stories from books she had read or memories from her childhood. They were learning each other, mapping the landscape of two lives being joined into one. One night in late October, a month and a half after their marriage, Barrett came in from evening chores looking troubled. Winifred noticed immediately, the way his shoulders were tight with tension, the frown creasing his forehead. "What is wrong?" she asked, setting aside her mending. He hung up his coat and hat, then came to sit beside her on the bench by the fire. "I was in town today, getting supplies before the first real snow. Heard some troubling news." "What kind of news?" "There has been rustling in the area. Organized bands hitting ranches at night and driving off cattle. 3 ranches have lost stock in the past 2 weeks, including the Hendersons who live about 10 miles south of us. They took nearly 50 head." Winifred felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Are we in danger?" "Possibly. I cannot watch the whole herd every night, especially once they are down in the lower pasture. I have been thinking about bringing them even closer, keeping them in the pasture right near the cabin, where I can hear if something happens. It will mean more work feeding them, since the grass is already grazed down, but it is better than losing them to thieves. What can I do to help?" Barrett looked at her with surprise and what might have been admiration. "You are not scared." "I am terrified, but that does not mean I am helpless. This is our ranch, our livelihood. Whatever needs to be done, I will do it." He took her hand, squeezing gently. "You are something special, Winnie Langley. Most women would be demanding I take them back to town where it is safe. I am not most women, and you are not getting rid of me that easily. Over the next week, They worked together to move the cattle closer to the cabin. Barrett also made arrangements with two neighboring ranchers to take turns keeping watch at night, a rotating system that meant each ranch would have extra eyes a few nights a week. On the nights when it was just the two of them, Barrett would do rounds every few hours, checking on the stock and looking for signs of trouble. Winifred hated those nights, lying awake listening for any sound that might signal danger. She had seen Barrett's rifle, knew he was prepared to defend what was theirs, but the thought of violence made her stomach turn. She had not come west to live in fear, yet fear seemed to have found her anyway. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that made the world look clean and new. Winifred stood on the porch, watching the flakes drift down, feeling Barrett's presence behind her. "Beautiful, is it not?" he said, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into him, enjoying the warmth and the easy affection that had developed between them. "It is. Does this mean winter has truly arrived?" "This is just a taste. The real snows will come in December and last through March. We will be snowed in for weeks at a time, just the two of us. I hope you do not get sick of my company." Winifred turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "I could never get sick of you, Barrett Langley. You have become too dear to me for that." His eyes softened, and he kissed her gently. Their kisses had become more frequent and more passionate as the weeks passed, though they had not yet taken the final step of consummating their marriage. Barrett seemed content to let things progress naturally, never pushing, always respectful of her comfort. Winifred appreciated it, but she also found herself wanting more, wanting to truly be his wife in every sense of the word. "Barrett," she said softly, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck, "I think I am ready for everything, for us to be truly married." His breath caught, and she saw desire flare in his eyes before he carefully banked it. "Are you certain?" "There is no rush, Winnie. I am happy to wait as long as you need." "I am certain. I want to be your wife in truth, not just in name. I want to share everything with you." That night, they came together with tenderness and care, Barrett gentle and patient as he guided her through the unfamiliar territory of physical intimacy. There was awkwardness and uncertainty, but also sweetness and a growing pleasure that surprised her. Afterward, lying in his arms, Winifred felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was what marriage was supposed to be, this partnership of mind and body and soul. "I love you, Winnie," Barrett whispered into her hair. "I know it has not been long, but I am certain of it. I love you." Tears pricked her eyes, happy tears for once. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to be practical and sensible, but my heart had other ideas." He kissed her temple, his arms tightening around her. "Thank God for impractical hearts, then." Winter settled over the valley with a vengeance. The snows came heavy and frequent, sometimes trapping them in the cabin for days at a time. Far from being cabin fever, Winifred found she loved these enforced periods of isolation. It was just the two of them, playing cards by the fire, reading aloud to each other, making love in the afternoon when the work was done. Barrett taught her to play chess, using pieces he carved from wood, and she taught him some of the songs she remembered from childhood. They celebrated a quiet Christmas together, exchanging simple gifts. Winifred had sewn him a new shirt from fabric she had carefully hoarded, while he had carved her an intricate jewelry box from pine, the lid decorated with a mountain scene. They roasted a small chicken and made the last of the potatoes into a feast, feeling rich, despite their simple circumstances. "This time last year, I was alone in this cabin, eating beans from a can and wondering if this was all my life would ever be," Barrett said as they sat by the fire after their meal. "Now I have you, and everything has changed. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible, Winnie. You have given me a life, Barrett. Not just rescued me from a bad situation, but given me a real life with purpose and meaning. I wake up grateful every single day." January brought news when a rider made it through with mail. There was a letter from Philadelphia, from Winifred's former neighbor, informing her that the landlord's son had been arrested for assault on another tenant. Winifred read the letter with grim satisfaction, grateful she had escaped that fate. There was also a letter for Barrett from the territorial government about a land grant he had applied for, approving his request for additional acreage. He whooped with joy when he read it, picking Winifred up and spinning her around the cabin. This means we can expand, run more cattle, maybe even get some horses to sell. This is a real future, Winnie. For us and for the family we will have someday. The mention of children made Winifred's heart skip. They had not discussed it explicitly, but she knew it was inevitable. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "How many children do you want?" she asked curiously. Barrett set her down, his expression thoughtful. "As many as the good Lord sees fit to bless us with. Though I confess, I hope for at least 2 or 3. I was an only child and it was lonely. I would like our children to have siblings. I would like that too. I always wished for brothers or sisters growing up." February brought a crisis. Winifred had been feeling poorly for a few days, nauseous in the mornings and exhausted by afternoon. She tried to hide it from Barrett, not wanting to worry him, but he noticed everything when it came to her. "You are not well," he said one morning, finding her bent over the wash basin, heaving. "How long has this been going on?" "A few days." "It is nothing. Probably just something I ate." He studied her with those perceptive eyes. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Winnie, when was your last monthly course?" She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped, counting backward in her head. Her eyes went wide. "I am late, nearly 6 weeks late. You are pregnant." He said it with such certainty and joy that she could not help but smile despite the nausea churning in her stomach. "I might be. It is too soon to know for certain." "I know. I can see it in you, the way you are glowing even when you feel terrible." He pulled her into a gentle embrace, mindful of her delicate state. "We're going to have a baby, Winnie." "Our baby." The joy in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "Are you happy?" "Happy? I am over the moon. You have given me everything I could ever want, and now you are giving me a child. I am the luckiest man in Colorado Territory." The pregnancy was confirmed over the next weeks as Winifred's symptoms continued and her body began to change. Barrett became absurdly protective, insisting she rest more and do less heavy work. She humored him because she loved him, but she also maintained that she was pregnant, not an invalid. Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow melting in fits and starts. By April, the valley was green again, wildflowers blooming in riotous color. Barrett's herd had survived the winter intact, and with the additional land grant, they were able to move cattle onto fresh pasture. He hired 2 ranch hands for the season, young men from town looking for work, and the extra help made the spring roundup much easier. Winifred's belly swelled with their child as the summer progressed. She spent her days tending an expanded garden, preserving food for the coming winter, and sewing tiny garments for the baby. The neighboring ranchers' wives began visiting now that the trails were passable, and Winifred made her first real friends in Colorado. Mary Henderson, whose husband's ranch had been hit by rustlers, became especially close. She had 3 children of her own, and delighted in sharing advice and baby clothes Winifred could borrow. One evening in late July, nearly a year after Winifred had arrived in Telluride, she and Barrett sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick and roll. "Do you ever regret it?" Barrett asked quietly. "Agreeing to marry me? Staying here instead of going back east?" Winifred looked at him in surprise. "Never. Not for a single moment." "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Your life is hard here. No luxuries, no society to speak of, just endless work and isolation. I worry sometimes that I took advantage of your desperation, that you settled for me because you had no other choice." She took his hand and placed it on her belly so he could feel the baby moving. This is not settling, Barrett. This is living, truly living in a way I never did back east. Yes, the work is hard, but it is meaningful. Yes, we are isolated, but we are together. And this baby, our baby, is the result of love, not desperation. You did not take advantage of me. You saved me, and then you loved me, and you gave me a life worth living. I would not trade a single moment of it. His eyes were bright with emotion when he finally looked at her. I do not deserve you, Winnie Langley. You deserve the world, Barrett Langley, and I intend to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you. The baby came in early September on a morning when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold. Mary Henderson served as midwife, having sent her husband to fetch Winifred when the contractions started. Barrett paced outside the cabin, wild with worry, until Mary finally called him in to meet his son. Winifred lay exhausted but radiant in their bed, holding a tiny bundle with dark hair and a red, squalling face. Barrett approached slowly, awe written across his features, and carefully took the baby from her arms. "A son," he breathed, studying the miniature features. "We have a son, Winnie." "We do. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never quite settled on one. Barrett looked down at the baby, who had stopped crying and was staring up at him with unfocused blue eyes. "Samuel," he said softly, "for the man who brought us together, even if he never knew it. Samuel Barrett Langley." Tears streamed down Winifred's face. "It is perfect. He would have been honored." Little Samuel proved to be a good baby, sleeping and eating well once he got the hang of nursing. Barrett was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, marveling at tiny fingers and toes, talking to him as though he could understand every word. Winifred watched them together and felt her heart might burst from the fullness of her love. The year that followed was busy and challenging in the way that all years with a new baby are. Samuel grew and thrived, learning to smile and laugh, sitting up and eventually crawling. Barrett expanded the cattle operation with the additional land, and their financial situation improved enough to make real improvements to the cabin. They added a proper bedroom for Samuel and a storage room, enlarging the living space considerably. Winifred's friendship with Mary Henderson deepened, and through her, she met other ranch wives in the area. They formed a sort of informal support network, visiting each other when weather and work permitted, sharing recipes and advice and the occasional bit of gossip. It was not the refined society of Philadelphia, but it was genuine and warm, and Winifred treasured it. One afternoon in early summer, nearly 2 years after Winifred had arrived in Telluride, she was hanging laundry when a rider approached. She recognized him as the sheriff from town, and her heart immediately began to race. Visitors were rare enough, but a visit from the law was unprecedented. Barrett was working in the barn and came out when he heard the horse. "Sheriff Dawson," he called in greeting. "What brings you all the way out here?" The sheriff dismounted, looking grim. "Got some news, Barrett. Thought you should hear it direct. We caught the rustlers who have been plaguing the area. Rounded up the whole gang 2 days ago down near Durango." "That is excellent news. Did you recover any stock?" "Some, though a lot had already been sold off." "Here is the thing, though. One of the men we caught started talking, trying to make a deal. He claims you were involved, says you were the one who told them which ranches to hit and when." Barrett went very still, his expression hardening. "That is a lie. I figured as much, but I had to come out and tell you in person. The man is a known liar and thief, and we have no evidence to support his claims. But I wanted you to know the accusation was made in case any rumors start circulating." "Who is accusing me?" "Fellow named Jack Masters. Says he met you in a saloon in Telluride last year and you two cooked up the scheme together." "I have never heard of Jack Masters, and I have not been in a saloon since before I was married. Sheriff, I have worked too hard to build this ranch to risk it all on some criminal scheme. You have to believe me." "I do believe you, Barrett. Your reputation in the valley is solid, and Masters cannot provide any proof of his claims. I just wanted you to hear it from me first." After the sheriff left, Barrett came to stand beside Winifred, watching the man ride away. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the anger and fear at being falsely accused. "It is going to be all right," she said quietly, taking his hand. "Everyone who knows you will know it is a lie. Will they? Or will they wonder if there is some truth to it? Mud sticks, Winnie, even when it should not. Then we will face it together, the same way we have faced everything else. You are a good man, Barrett Langley. The truth will prevail." She was right, though it took time. Over the next weeks, various neighbors stopped by to express their support and disbelief in the accusations. The sheriff made a point of publicly stating that Barrett was not under investigation and that Master's claims were considered false. Gradually, the talk died down and life returned to normal. That experience, difficult as it was, seemed to strengthen Barrett and Winifred's bond even further. They had weathered the storm together, their trust in each other unshaken. Barrett became even more affectionate, frequently pulling Winifred into his arms for no reason other than needing to hold her, telling her how grateful he was that she had never doubted him. Samuel took his first steps in October, and by Christmas he was toddling around the cabin, getting into everything. They hosted Mary Henderson and her family for Christmas dinner, along with 2 other neighboring families, and the small cabin rang with laughter and conversation. Winifred looked around at the gathered friends, at her husband holding their son, at the life they had built together, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "What are you thinking?" Barrett asked later, after everyone had gone home and Samuel was asleep in his bed. "I'm thinking about how different this Christmas is from the one 3 years ago when I was alone in Philadelphia, wondering if I would ever have a real home. I am thinking about how a terrible situation led me to the best thing that ever happened to me. I am thinking about how grateful I am for every single day we have together." Barrett pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that still surprised her with its intensity even after all this time. "I am grateful too. For you, for Samuel, for this life. You took a chance on a stranger, Winnie, and you made him the happiest man alive. You took a chance on me too," she reminded him, "and you gave me everything I had ever dreamed of and more." Time moved on, as it always does, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their son. Samuel proved to be a bright, curious child, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. He followed Barrett everywhere once he was old enough, learning about horses and cattle and the work of the ranch. Winifred watched them together and saw the legacy being passed down, father to son, the way it had been done for generations. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Winifred found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because she was stronger and more confident than she had been the first time. Barrett was just as protective and loving, perhaps more so now that he knew how precious the gift of a child truly was. Their daughter was born on a warm May afternoon, delivered with less drama than Samuel's birth had been. She had her father's eyes and her mother's light brown hair, and they named her Grace Ellen after both their mothers. Barrett cried when he held her for the first time, overwhelmed by the perfection of this tiny girl. 2 children, he marveled, looking from Grace to where Samuel was peeking curiously at his new sister. "We have 2 beautiful children, Winnie. How did I get so lucky?" "We got lucky," she corrected, "both of us." Samuel was initially uncertain about the baby, but he quickly grew to love his sister with a fierce protectiveness that reminded Winifred of Barrett. He would sit beside her cradle and tell her stories, or bring her flowers he picked from the meadow, or insist on helping with her care in ways that were more hindrance than help, but always well-intentioned. The ranch continued to prosper. Barrett's hard work and good management paid off, and they were able to add more cattle, buy better breeding stock, and make improvements to both the house and the outbuildings. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, with enough to meet their needs and a little set aside for emergencies. Winifred had become an integral part of the community, known for her kindness and her skill with a needle. She took in sewing work when she had time, making a little extra money that she saved for the children's future. She also started teaching Samuel his letters and numbers, determined that her children would have the education she had lacked. 5 years after that desperate day at the Telluride depot, Winifred stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sun set over the mountains. Samuel, now 7, was helping his father check on the cattle in the near pasture. Grace, 3 years old, played at her feet with a wooden doll Barrett had carved. The valley was lush with summer growth, the air sweet with the scent of wildflowers and pine. Barrett emerged from the barn and crossed the yard to join her on the porch, Samuel trailing behind him, chattering about something he had seen. He lifted his son onto the porch rail, then moved to stand behind Winifred, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, a question he had taken to asking frequently, as though he needed constant reassurance that she did not regret her choices. "Blissfully so," she answered, the same response she always gave because it was always true. "You? More than I can express, though I have been thinking." "About what?" "About maybe expanding again, adding sheep to the operation. What do you think?" Winifred laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "I think you are always looking for the next challenge, Barrett Langley. But if you want sheep, then we will have sheep. Whatever you want to do, we will do it together." "Together," he repeated, kissing her softly. "I like the sound of that. It has worked pretty well for us so far." "Pretty well," she agreed with a smile. "Though I might have worded it more strongly. Spectacularly, perhaps. Or miraculously." "Miraculously," Barrett said thoughtfully. "Yes, that fits. It was a miracle that brought you to me, and it has been a miracle every day since. I found you when you had given up hope, and you found me when I did not even know I was lost. That is as close to a miracle as I am likely to get in this lifetime." Samuel interrupted their moment by tugging on Barrett's sleeve. "Papa, can I sleep in the barn tonight? Please? I want to be near the horses." "No, son. The barn is for animals, not for boys. But tomorrow night we can camp out under the stars if your mother agrees. Would you like that?" Samuel's face lit up with excitement, and he turned pleading eyes on Winifred. "Can we, Mama? Please." "We can," she agreed, ruffling his dark hair. "Now go wash up for supper. You too, Grace." The children scampered inside, and for a moment it was just Barrett and Winifred on the porch, watching the light fade from the sky. These moments had become precious to her, these brief interludes of quiet in the midst of their busy life. "Do you ever think about that day at the depot?" Barrett asked softly. "About how close you came to giving up, to losing hope entirely?" "Sometimes. But mostly I think about how glad I am that I did not give up, that I held on just long enough for you to find me. One more day and I might have done something desperate. One more day and we might never have had this life, these children, this love. The timing was perfect, as though it was meant to be. I believe it was meant to be. I believe Samuel was meant to die, as awful as that sounds, so that you and I could find each other. Otherwise, you would be married to him and I would still be alone in this cabin. Some greater purpose was at work, bringing us together." Winifred leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Then I am grateful to that greater purpose, whatever it may be. And I am grateful to you for being the kind of man who would ride 15 miles to help a stranger, who would offer marriage to a woman he had never met, who would trust and love and build a life with me. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, Barrett." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You gave me a reason to work this hard, a reason to build something lasting. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me want to live, really live. You and our children are my whole world, Winnie." They stood together in the gathering darkness, content in each other's presence and in the life they had built from nothing. Inside, they could hear Samuel and Grace laughing about something, their young voices bright with joy. This was what mattered, Winifred thought. Not wealth or status or the trappings of civilization, but this simple happiness, this family, this love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard times, winters when money was tight and they had to stretch every resource, summers when drought threatened the herd, illnesses that brought fear in the night until they passed. But there were also triumphs. Good years when the cattle brought high prices, celebrations when neighbors gathered for barn raisings and weddings, quiet evenings when the family sat together by the fire and felt rich beyond measure. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man who took to ranching like he had been born to it. Grace proved to have a head for figures and a talent for negotiation, skills that served the ranch well when it came time to sell cattle or buy supplies. They were good children, kind and hardworking, and Barrett and Winifred were proud of the people they were becoming. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Barrett surprised Winifred with a trip to Telluride. They left the children with Mary Henderson and spent 2 days in town, staying at the hotel and eating at the restaurant. It was a luxury they rarely allowed themselves, and Winifred savored every moment. On their last evening, they walked to the depot where they had first met. It looked much the same as it had 10 years earlier, the same platform where Winifred had sat waiting, the same bench where she had spent 3 desperate days hoping for rescue. "I see you sometimes in my nightmares," she confessed as they stood looking at the platform. "Still sitting there, still waiting, but in the dream, I never come. You just sit there forever, abandoned and alone. Then I wake up and reach for you, just to make sure you are real, that I did not imagine rescuing you." Winifred took his hand, squeezing tightly. "I am real, and you are real, and this life we have built is real. Those 3 days were awful, but they led me to you. I would sit on that bench for 300 days if I knew it would end with you finding me. I would search for 300 days to find you," he replied. "In this life, or any other, I would find you, Winnie. We were meant to be together. I am certain of it." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, their steps slow and easy, in no hurry to end this rare time alone together. That night, in the comfortable hotel room, they made love with the passion and tenderness of a couple deeply in love, their connection as strong as it had been in those early days, but deeper now, layered with years of shared experience and mutual understanding. "I love you," Winifred whispered in the darkness afterward, "more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You are my heart, Barrett Langley." "And you are mine," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Forever and always, you are mine and I am yours." The children were happy to have them home when they returned, full of stories about their stay with the Hendersons and eager to show their parents everything that had happened in their absence. The ranch felt more like home than ever, and Winifred marveled at how completely this place had become her world. She rarely thought of Philadelphia anymore, except in the abstract way one remembers a dream from long ago. More children did not come, despite their hopes. Whether it was age or simply the way things were meant to be, Samuel and Grace remained their only two. Barrett claimed he was content with the children they had, and in truth, Winifred was as well. Their family felt complete, balanced in a way that satisfied something deep within her soul. As the children grew older and needed less direct supervision, Winifred found time to pursue other interests. She started a small library in town, collecting books from anyone willing to donate and opening it to all who wanted to read. She taught sewing classes to young girls, passing on the skills her aunt had taught her. She became known as someone people could turn to in times of trouble, whether they needed a sympathetic ear or practical help. Barrett watched her grow into this role with pride and love. His wife was not just his partner on the ranch, but a pillar of their community, respected and valued by everyone who knew her. He told her often how proud he was of her, how grateful he was that she had chosen him, how lucky he felt every single day. Their 20th anniversary arrived on a crisp autumn day, the aspens blazing gold against the blue sky. The children, now young adults, had planned a celebration, inviting what seemed like half the valley to the ranch for a party. There was food and music, dancing and laughter, a joyful celebration of 2 decades of marriage and the family they had built. As the sun began to set, Barrett pulled Winifred away from the crowd, leading her to the top of the rise where they could see the whole valley spread out before them. From here, they could see the cabin that had grown into a proper house, the barn and outbuildings, the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. They could see their guests gathered on the lawn, Samuel playing fiddle while Grace danced with one of the young men from town. They could see the life they had built, solid and real and beautiful. 20 years, Barrett said, his arm around Winifred's waist. 20 years since I found you at that depot, looking lost and brave and beautiful. 20 years of waking up beside you, of building this life together, of loving you more with each passing day. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Neither would I, Winifred agreed, leaning into his solid warmth. Not the hard times, not the struggles, not even those 3 terrible days of waiting. It all led us here, to this moment, to this life. I was mail order bride who waited 3 days alone, and you were the cowboy who found me and took me home. And somehow, impossibly, we became everything to each other. Not impossibly, Barrett corrected gently. Inevitably. We were always meant to find each other, Winnie. Distance and circumstance and even death tried to keep us apart, but we found each other anyway. That is not impossible. That is fate. That is love. Below them, someone called their names, beckoning them back to the party, but they stayed on the rise a moment longer, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, holding each other close, grateful for every moment of the journey that had brought them here. Come on, Winifred said finally, taking his hand. We have a party to get back to. Our guests will wonder where we have gone. Let them wonder, Barrett replied, but he allowed her to lead him back down the hill toward the house, toward the noise and laughter and love that filled their home. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Barrett and Winifred lay in their bed, exhausted but happy. The house was quiet except for the familiar creaks and sighs of settling wood, the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. Thank you, Winifred whispered, her head on Barrett's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For what? For everything. For finding me. For taking me home. For loving me. For giving me this beautiful life. For being exactly the man I needed, even when I did not know what I needed. For 20 years of happiness, and for however many more years we are blessed with. Thank you for all of it. Barrett was quiet for a long moment, his hand stroking her hair with gentle repetition. The thanks go both ways, Winnie. You took a broken man and made him whole. You took a lonely cabin and turned it into a home. You gave me children and purpose and love beyond measure. I was barely living before you came into my life. You made me want to be better, to do better, to build something lasting and good. Everything I am, everything I have, I owe to you. Then we are even, she said softly. 2 lost souls who found each other and built something beautiful from nothing. I could not have asked for a better partner, a better husband, a better life. I love you, Barrett Langley. Today, tomorrow, and always. I love you too, Winnie Langley. Forever and always. They fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. They had weathered 20 years of storms and celebrations, of heartbreak and joy, of ordinary days that somehow added up to an extraordinary life. And they would weather 20 more, or 40, or however many they were granted because they had each other, and that was enough. The story could have ended there, with that moment of perfect contentment and mutual love. But life is not a story that ends with a single, perfect moment. It continues, day after day, year after year, each moment building on the last to create a lifetime of memories and experiences. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over, a strong, capable woman who reminded everyone of Winifred. They built a house on the eastern portion of the ranch and started their own herd, working in partnership with Barrett to expand the operation. Within 2 years, they made Barrett and Winifred grandparents, presenting them with a grandson they named Barrett Samuel, called Bear by everyone who knew him. Grace surprised everyone by falling in love with a teacher who came to Telluride to establish a proper school. They married and moved into town, where Grace opened a shop selling goods from the various ranches in the valley, including cheese and butter and woven goods. She proved to have a head for business, and the shop thrived, providing a steady income and a valuable service to the community. Barrett and Winifred found themselves entering a new phase of life, still active on the ranch, but gradually allowing Samuel to take over more of the day-to-day operations. They took more time for themselves, for long rides through the mountains they loved, for visits with their growing family, for simply sitting on the porch and enjoying the view. "We are getting old," Barrett said one evening, noting the gray that now threaded through both their hair, the lines that time had etched on both their faces. "We are getting older," Winifred corrected. "But we are not old. Not yet. We still have plenty of years ahead of us," Barrett Langley. "Years I intend to spend exactly like this," he said, pulling her close. "With you, in this place we built together, surrounded by family and love. I cannot imagine a better way to grow old." "Neither can I," she agreed. "Though I must admit, sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life. That scared girl sitting alone at the depot feels like a different person entirely. I look at everything we have built, everyone we love, and I am amazed at how far we have come." "You were never just a scared girl," Barrett said firmly. "You were a survivor, a fighter, a woman with enough courage to travel across the country alone and enough strength to make a life in a harsh land. That girl at the depot became this woman beside me, but the core of who you are never changed. You were always strong, always brave, always worthy of love and respect. I just happened to be lucky enough to see it." Winifred kissed him, a soft press of lips that still held the power to make her heart flutter, even after all these years. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Because I have spent 23 years studying you, learning what makes you smile, what brings you comfort, what touches your heart. You are my life's work, Winnie Langley, and I take that work very seriously." They rocked together on the porch as the sun set, content in the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed words to communicate. This was the gift of a long marriage, Winifred thought. The ability to simply be together, to draw comfort from proximity, to find peace in shared silence. The years that followed brought their share of sorrows and joys. Mary Henderson passed away after a long illness, leaving a hole in Winifred's heart that never quite healed. But new friendships formed, and the community that had sustained them continued to grow and thrive. More grandchildren arrived, 4 more in total, filling the ranch with young voices and laughter. Barrett and Winifred delighted in spoiling them in the way grandparents are permitted to do, taking them on adventures and teaching them skills and telling them stories of the old days. On their 30th anniversary, the family gathered once again, though this time the celebration was quieter, more intimate. Samuel and his wife cooked the meal. Grace decorated the house with wildflowers. The grandchildren performed a play they had written about their grandparents' courtship. It was simple and heartfelt and perfect. 30 years, Barrett marveled as they prepared for bed that night. 30 years of marriage, and I still get excited when I see you walk into a room. I still reach for you in my sleep. I still consider myself the luckiest man alive to call you my wife. Only 30 years? Winifred teased. I suppose that means we should aim for 30 more. That would make us 98 and 92, respectively. I am not sure we will make it quite that long, my love. Then we will take what we can get and make every day count. That is all we have ever done, is it not? Make each day count, build something lasting, love each other through whatever comes. It is a good philosophy. It has served us well. They made love that night with the tenderness and care of long practice, their bodies perhaps not as young and strong as they once were, but their connection as powerful as ever. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Winifred found herself thinking about all the moments that had led to this one. The letter from Samuel that had brought her west, the 3 days of waiting that had tested her resolve, the moment Barrett had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer. Every choice, every moment, every challenge overcome had led them here, to this place of contentment and love. No regrets? Barrett asked, as though reading her thoughts. Not a single one. You? How could I regret anything when it all led me to you? It was the perfect answer, the true answer, and it settled over them like a benediction. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, as they had done for 30 years, as they would do for however many years remained. Time moved on, as it always does, bringing changes and challenges they met together. Barrett's knees began to ache in cold weather, a reminder of too many years working in harsh conditions. Winifred's eyesight dimmed, making her sewing work more difficult. But they adapted, adjusted, found ways to continue doing what they loved, even as their bodies betrayed them with age. Samuel took over the ranch entirely when Barrett turned 65, though Barrett still helped with the lighter tasks and offered advice when asked. It was hard for him at first, letting go of the work that had defined so much of his life, but Winifred helped him see it not as an ending, but as a transition. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren. That was success by any measure. "We did it," Barrett said one evening, sitting on the porch that had been their sanctuary for so many years. "We built something real, something lasting. The ranch will go on long after we are gone, and our family will work this land and remember us. That is as close to immortality as people like us get." "It is more than I ever dreamed of having," Winifred replied. "When I was sitting at that depot, I would have been grateful for a roof over my head and food in my belly. Instead, I got a love that transformed my entire life, children who fill me with pride, grandchildren who bring me joy, and a home that will stand for generations. How did I get so lucky? We both got lucky, impossibly, improbably, miraculously lucky." They celebrated their 35th anniversary with another family gathering, though this one was even larger as now there were great-grandchildren toddling about. Bear, Samuel's oldest, had married and started his own family. The ranch house rang with noise and chaos and laughter, exactly as Barrett and Winifred had always hoped it would. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Barrett and Winifred took one last walk around the property. It was a beautiful summer evening, warm and clear, the stars so bright it seemed possible to reach up and touch them. They walked slowly, hand in hand, past the barn where it had all begun, past the corrals that now held twice as many cattle as they had started with, past the gardens that Winifred had tended for 35 years. "I have been thinking," Barrett said as they paused by the creek that ran through the property, "about Samuel Garrett, the man you were supposed to marry. I have been thinking that I should be grateful to him for writing to you, for bringing you west, for dying so that I could find you. That sounds terrible, does not it?" "It sounds honest," Winifred replied. "I have thought the same thing many times. He was, by all accounts, a good man who deserved better than death at 30. But his loss became our gain, and I cannot regret that even though I wish he could have lived. Perhaps in some other life, I married him and was happy in a different way. But in this life, I married you, and I cannot imagine anything better. Do you think he would approve? Of us, I mean, of how things turned out." Winifred considered the question seriously. "I think he would. From his letters, he seemed like a kind man who wanted me to be happy. I think if he could see us now, see what we built together, he would be glad that his death led to so much life and love. At least I hope he would." They stood by the creek for a long while, listening to the water flow past, feeling the breeze on their faces, savoring the peace of the moment. This land had been good to them. This life had been good to them, and they had been good to each other. What more could anyone ask? "Come on," Barrett said finally. "Let us go to bed. I am not as young as I used to be, and all this celebrating has worn me out." They walked back to the house together, their steps slow but steady, their hands still clasped after all these years. Inside, the house was quiet, everyone else already asleep. They prepared for bed with the easy routine of long practice, moving around each other in the small space with the coordination of partners who knew each other's movements as well as their own. In bed, Winifred curled into Barrett's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. This was her favorite place in the entire world, this safe harbor of his embrace. Here, all the worries and fears of the outside world faded away, leaving only love and peace and contentment. "Winnie?" Barrett's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes? Thank you for waiting, for sitting on that depot bench for 3 days, for not giving up, for holding on just long enough for me to find you. If you had left even 1 day earlier, we would never have had this life. Every moment of happiness we have shared, every child and grandchild, every sunrise and sunset, all of it came from your decision to wait. So thank you." Tears pricked Winifred's eyes. "Thank you for coming to find me, for taking a chance on a desperate stranger, for offering marriage when you had no obligation to, for loving me even when I did not believe I deserved to be loved. Thank you for 35 years of partnership and friendship and love. Thank you for this beautiful life." "Thank you for saying yes," Barrett replied. "To marriage, to this life, to me. Best decision I ever made was asking you. Second best decision you ever made was accepting. What was the first? Waiting. Waiting for 3 days at that depot. Waiting for rescue. Waiting for hope. That was the first, and everything else followed from there." They fell asleep like that, holding each other close, grateful for the journey that had brought them together, and for every moment they had been given. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, the creek flowed endlessly on, and the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. Inside, two hearts beat in tandem, still finding comfort in each other after all these years, still drawing strength from their union, still completely and utterly in love. Morning came gently, as mornings always did in the valley. Barrett woke first, as was his habit, and lay watching Winifred sleep in the early light. She was beautiful to him, more so now than ever, her face marked by time and experience, every line telling a story of their shared life. He had found her when she was lost, but the truth was she had found him too, had saved him from a half-life of loneliness, and given him purpose and joy beyond measure. She stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning. Good morning, my love. Sleep well? Always do when I am with you." She stretched, then settled back against him. "What shall we do today?" "Whatever we want. We have earned that privilege, I think. We can sit on the porch, take a ride, visit with the grandchildren, or do absolutely nothing at all." "I vote for a combination. A ride this morning while it is cool, lunch on the porch, then maybe we entice some of the grandchildren to visit this afternoon. How does that sound?" "Perfect. Everything with you is perfect." They rose and dressed, moving with the slowness that age demanded, but spirits that remained young. After a simple breakfast, they saddled 2 horses and set out into the mountains they had called home for 35 years. The trail was familiar, every turn and dip known to them, but it never lost its beauty, its power to take their breath away. They rode to a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers, dismounting to sit on a fallen log and eat the lunch they had packed. From here they could see for miles in every direction, the valley spread out below them like a green jewel, their ranch a small collection of buildings that somehow contained their entire world. "I could stay here forever," Winifred said, leaning against Barrett's shoulder. Just you and me and this view. We will stay as long as you like, Barrett promised. We have nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. This moment is ours. They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the sky, feeling the sun warm on their faces, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. This was what they had built, not just a ranch or a family, but a life rich with simple pleasures and profound love. This was what it meant to be truly happy, truly content, truly at peace. Eventually, they mounted their horses and rode back down to the valley, to the ranch, to the family that waited for them. The grandchildren did come to visit that afternoon, filling the house with noise and energy and the particular chaos that only children can bring. Barrett and Winifred watched them play, occasionally offering guidance or settling disputes, but mostly just enjoying their presence and vitality. "This is our legacy," Barrett said as they watched Bear teaching his younger cousins how to rope a fence post. "Not the land or the cattle, but this: family, love, tradition passed from generation to generation. We did that, Winnie. We created all of this." "We did," she agreed, pride and love swelling in her chest. "From nothing, from 3 days of waiting and a chance meeting, we built all of this. It seems impossible when you think about it." "Nothing is impossible when you have love," Barrett replied. "We proved that, did we not? Against all odds, we found each other and built a life that will echo through the generations. That mail-order bride who waited alone became a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a cornerstone of this community. That lonely cowboy who found her became a husband, a father, a patriarch of a thriving family. We became more than we ever could have been separately. Together," Winifred said softly. "We became everything together." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the family gathered on the porch for one last farewell. Children were collected, promises made to visit again soon, hugs and kisses exchanged. Then they departed, leaving Barrett and Winifred alone once more, just the two of them in the house they had built, surrounded by the life they had created. "Another good day," Barrett said, pulling Winifred into his arms. "Another perfect day," she corrected. "Every day with you is perfect, Barrett Langley. Even the hard ones, even the sad ones, even the ordinary ones. All of them are perfect because I get to share them with you." He kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that still had the power to make her knees weak even after 35 years. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his expression peaceful. "I love you, Winnie Langley. Today, tomorrow, and always. Until my last breath and beyond, I will love you. And I love you, Barrett Langley. My savior, my husband, my partner, my best friend, my everything. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for taking me home. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this beautiful, impossible, perfect life." They stood together on the porch as darkness fell, watching the stars emerge one by one, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The mail-order bride, who had waited 3 days at the depot alone, was gone, transformed into a woman loved and cherished beyond measure. The cowboy who had found her and took her home had become so much more than a rescuer, had become her whole heart, her entire world. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love and hard work and unwavering commitment to each other. Their story had begun with desperation and chance, but it had become something beautiful, something true, something that proved love could bloom even in the harshest of circumstances. As they finally went inside for the night, closing the door on another perfect day, they knew without speaking that they would do it all again. Every moment, every challenge, every joy and sorrow, they would face it all again if it meant ending up here, together, in this life they had built from nothing. The end of one day was simply the beginning of the next, and they would face it together, as they had faced every day for 35 years. Hand in hand, heart to heart, until the very end, and perhaps beyond. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their happy ending earned through love, patience, and the courage to take a chance on a stranger. The mail order bride had found her home, and the cowboy had found his heart, and together they had found everything they had ever needed. It was, in every sense that mattered, a perfect ending to a love story that began with 3 days of waiting and a cowboy who came to the rescue. But more than that, it was a perfect life, fully lived, deeply loved, and never regretted. And that, Winifred and Barrett both knew, was the greatest gift of all.